The Detroit Lions are notorious for being the joke of the NFL. The first winless season, they did it. Losing by 2 record-setting field goals. They did it. Winning just 1 playoff game in 65 years, the Detroit Lions did that. But many people don't actually know the entire story of the Lions, and I'll tell you, it's a whole lot worse than you think. The Lions didn't actually start in Detroit. They were founded in Portsmouth, Ohio. They would play from 1930 to 33 and barely attract fans. So George Richards bought the franchise and moved them Lions to Detroit. Straight off the bat, Detroit won an NFL championship in 1935 in front of their 15,000 fans. Fast forward to the 50s, and the Lions peaked in success. Hall of Fame quarterback Bobby Layne would win 3 championships. And everyone knows how talented football was in the 50s, so Detroit should be thankful they won that much. But when Bobby Layne was getting older, he became more injury prone. Thinking they had no more use of him, Detroit traded Bobby Layne to Pittsburgh for Earl Morrall and a couple draft picks. But rumor has it that he was traded for a 6-pack of beer and an old tire, so let's just go with that one. But this is a late great Bobby Layne we're talking about. You don't just trade him away for booze and tires. Layne was angry, and legend has it he cursed the Detroit Lions, claiming they would never win a championship in 50 years. Well, Layne was obviously wrong. It's actually been 70 years, and Detroit still hasn't won, or even gotten close to winning anything. It's kind of hard to take a curse in sports seriously. Like, did the Cubs really get cursed by a billy goat or the Maple Leafs by a fishing incident? Curses are likely a bunch of over-exaggerated bogus to explain why a team sucks. So it's hard to tell fans that the real reason the Detroit Lions have sucked so long is because a drunk-driving quarterback cursed them 65 years ago. But nevertheless, some strokes of bad luck started happening in the 1960s. The Lions became very talented on defense, with Pro Bowlers like Dick Night Train Lane, Joe Schmidt, Charlie Sanders, and some more guys. But during this time, only the best team in each division would reach the championship. In 3 straight years, the Lions were runner-ups to the Green Bay Packers. After that, however, things went downhill really fast. The Ford Motor Company bought the Detroit Lions for $4.5 million in 1963. Unfortunately for Ford, that just kind of happened to be the year they fell apart, recording one of their first losing seasons in a while. Over the following decade, the Detroit Lions really only made headlines once. That was when Marvin Gaye, with no football experience whatsoever, gained a bunch of weight and tried out for the Lions. Of course he got cut, but at least he recruited some backup singers along the way. Meanwhile, a merge in the NFL brought competition to a whole new level. The Lions tried their best, even making the playoffs in 1970, but a 5-0 defeat proved they weren't good enough to keep up. Sadly, tragedy struck on October 24th, 1971, when Chuck Hughes died of a heart attack on the field. That was the only time someone passed away on an NFL field. Unfortunately, heart disease also claimed its next victim a few years later, with Lions head coach Don McCafferty. Detroit's mediocrity would continue through the 1970s, until in 1979. What happened in 1979? Well, that's for you to find out. Did they A. Win a championship? B. Make a championship? C. At least get close to winning a championship? Or D. Win 2 games? Look, the Lions were on top of the world in the 1950s. They won 3 championships. Sometimes it takes a few years for a team to climb that summit again, but they can still do it. But not the Detroit Lions. At this point, it had been over 20 years since they won a championship. They were stuck in the 50s and hadn't even been close to another one. A 2-win season does come with its benefits, because the Lions would get to choose the first overall pick in 1980. Coach Clark drafted a Heisman-winning running back from Oklahoma, Billy Sims, and later in that draft, Eric Hipple at quarterback. Now these guys were completely different on the field. Billy Sims would leap over defenders and do weird kung fu karate kicks. Meanwhile, Eric Hipple would have the living crap beat out of him by 300-pound defenders game after game. But both had something in common. They always got back on their feet and they always had to strive to win. So let's see what they did. 1980, they put up a winning 9-win record, but missed the playoffs. 1981, now the Lions get to decide their fate. It's a win and go in versus the Buccaneers. But at home, they imploded and missed the playoffs. 1982, congrats, the Lions finally made the playoffs. But wait, they had a losing record? Who cares, just get whacked in the first round. 1983, this was the Lions' best season in a while. Detroit finally got revenge on the Bucs in a win-or-go-home Week 16, and the Lions had to face San Francisco in the divisional round. San Fran were the defending champs, and they were being led by the legendary Joe Montana. The chances of winning were slim, especially with quarterback Eric Hipple injured, but a sliver of hope appeared on the last play of the game. The Lions were down 24-23, on the 26-yard line, with star kicker Eddie Murray ready to attempt the game-winning field goal. The Stars had a line, the 43-yarder was manageable, and the Detroit Lions might finally be in championship contention again. Just for safe measures, Coach Clark gave a prayer to God. A prayer for all the sadness that has burdened this organization over the last few decades, and a Bobby Layne, probably drinking some beer in heaven. So let's win a playoff game.
Win the game. Long enough, it is no good. He missed it to the right.
Holy crap. I'm sorry guys, but I guess the football gods don't answer to the Lions. So in 1984, Billy Sims, one of Detroit's best players to this point, injured his knee. Sims went through rehab for 2 years, but sadly he went into retirement after playing football again seemed hopeless. The 4-win season had Monte Clark, Detroit's longest coach, fired. Darryl Rogers overtook his job until he was fired. Finally, with injuries and age burdening his career, quarterback Eric Hipple retired. In the 1990s, the Lions didn't win the Super Bowl. They barely won a playoff game, and they were still the joke of the league. But despite their usual failure, the 90s were probably still the best decade in Detroit Lions history. In 1989, there just happened to be another Heisman-winning superstar Oklahoma-bound running back. That was Barry Sanders. And if you discount team success and base it just on individual performance, I say Barry Sanders is the greatest running back of all time. In his rookie season, he rushed 1,470 yards, just 10 yards behind first place. The following year, Sanders would win the rushing title of over 1,300. The talent was there, the only thing missing was a talented team. In 1991, the Lions would get shut out by the Redskins 45-0 on national television in Week 1. But they rebounded, ending with 12 wins, their best record to date. Late in the season, Mike Utley was carted off the field with a paralysis injury. But famously, he put a thumbs up to the Silverdome crowd, which proved to be a motivating symbol for Detroit. The Lions stormed into the playoffs and dismantled the Dallas Cowboys 38-6, winning their first playoff game since the 1950s. But unfortunately, one game away from the Super Bowl, they were scheduled to play the Washington Redskins. In the first game of Detroit's season, Washington won in domination, and history repeated itself in their final game of the season. This marks the closest Detroit has been in recent memory to reaching the Super Bowl. Barry Sanders would lead Detroit to 4 more playoff visits in the 90s, but with lackluster quarterbacks and defense, the Lions never made it past the wild card. Sanders will be regarded as no doubt the greatest Detroit Lion to ever play, and he stayed dedicated to the Motor City despite their lack of success. In fact, his highlight reel with quick changes of speed and direction are the best you'll ever see. But sadly, in the prime of his career, Barry Sanders retired. Without Barry, the Lions got blown out in the wild card, and then missed the playoffs after a 54-yard game-losing dagger.
54-yard field goal. Good! Good! The Bears win! The Lions are gone! And while Detroit is stunned...
Matt Millen would soon take the role of general manager, and he would be regarded as, surprise, the worst in NFL history. Bad decisions, firing head coaches, and wasted draft picks would overload Millen's resume. In 2001, the Lions started the season 0-12 until barely squeaking out 2 wins to avoid the winless season. The front office in Detroit was still in turmoil though. Coaches were being replaced left and right, draft prospects injured left and right, and during all of this, the Lions hadn't won a road game in 3 freaking years. Remember what I said happened in 2001 when Detroit lost 12 straight to open the season? Well, the chance that those 12 games might turn into 16 was definitely a possibility. It was only a matter of time. In 2007, the Lions had a mediocre season, and in 2008, they won all 4 games in the preseason. But once the regular season began, they fell into a huge hole and sure as hell couldn't get out of it. 3 blowouts started it off, and that sent Matt Millen out of office. Dan Orlovsky would lead Detroit out of the end zone into the joke of the league. I mean, they had already been the joke for the last 50 years, but here was a new milestone. After losing 31-21 in Green Bay, the Detroit Lions accomplished the first 0-16 season. The Lions drafted Matthew Stafford first overall after going winless. They would later draft receiver Calvin Johnson. The Stafford-Johnson duo would become one of the best in the league, on the worst team in the league. The Lions definitely became more exciting if anything, better than their annual Thanksgiving Slaughterfest. They made the wild card a couple times, stirring up excitement in the Motor City, but each game would soon turn into a sad blowout year after year. Their front office was still changing regularly, but Matthew Stafford was sick of it. He decided to leave Detroit and win a Super Bowl with the Rams. Now coming into 2023, the Lions have finally built some hype around their team, with, don't laugh, Jared Goff at QB. But that doesn't take away from the sad history that this franchise has compiled. A curse almost 7 decades ago, leading to some untimely deaths, unanswered prayers, and an 0-16 season. There's no other way to describe the Detroit Lions but cursed.